जस पंजाबी देखते हुए सारे दर्शकों ਨੂੰ ਮੇਰੇ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਪਿਆਰ ਭਰੀ ਸਤਿ ਸ਼੍ਰੀ ਅਕਾਲ। ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਸਵਾਗਤ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਅੱਜ ਦਾ ਮੁੱਦਾ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਮੈਂ ਤੁਹਾਡੀ ਹੋਸਟ ਆਸ਼ਮਿਤਾ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਇਸ ਸ਼ਾਮ ਦੇ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸਵਾਗਤ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ। ਉਮੀਦ ਹੈ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਵੀਕਐਂਡ ਵਧੀਆ ਰਿਹਾ ਹੋਵੇਗਾ। ਲੋਕਲ ਇਲੈਕਸ਼ਨਸ ਨੂੰ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਸਾਰੀ ਜਾਣਕਾਰੀ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਸ਼ੇਅਰ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ। ਨਿਊਯਾਰਕ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਖਾਸ ਕਰਕੇ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਕਿੰਨੀ ਦੇਰ ਤੋਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਦੱਸ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ ਰੀਡਿਸਟ੍ਰਿਕਟਿੰਗ ਕਰਕੇ ਕਾਫੀ ਇਸ ਸਾਲ ਸਪੈਸ਼ਲ ਕੁਝ ਇਨਵਾਇਰਨਮੈਂਟ ਬਣੀ ਹੋਈ ਹੈ, ਖਾਸ ਕਰਕੇ ਜੋ ਲੋਕਲ ਇਲੈਕਸ਼ਨਸ ਹਨ, ਭਾਵੇਂ ਪ੍ਰਾਇਮਰੀ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਗਿਣ ਲਓ ਜਾਂ ਨਵੰਬਰ ਦੇ ਮਿਡ ਟਰਮਸ ਤੋਂ ਪਹਿਲੇ ਜੋ ਸਥਿਤੀ ਡਿਵੈਲਪ ਹੋ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ, ਖਾਸ ਕਰਕੇ ਨਿਊਯਾਰਕ ਸਿਟੀ, ਲੌਂਗ ਆਈਲੈਂਡ ਦੇ ਕੁਝ ਏਰੀਆਜ਼ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਅੱਜ ਅਸੀਂ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਹੋਰ ਜਾਣਕਾਰੀ ਸ਼ੇਅਰ ਕਰਨ ਜਾ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ। ਜਿਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਹਮੇਸ਼ਾ ਹੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਕੋਸ਼ਿਸ਼ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਲੋਕਲ ਕੈਂਡੀਡੇਟਸ, ਖਾਸ ਕਰਕੇ ਜੋ ਸਾਡੀ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਤੋਂ ਯੂਥ ਅੱਗੇ ਆ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਨੂੰ ਰਿਪਰੈਜ਼ੈਂਟ ਕਰਨ ਲਈ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਹਮੇਸ਼ਾ ਅਸੀਂ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਵਿੱਚ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਆਉਂਦੇ। ਸੋ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਬਹੁਤ ਖੁਸ਼ੀ ਹੋ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਅੱਜ ਦੇ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਵੀ ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਸਟੂਡੀਓ ਜੁੜ ਰਹੇ ਹੈ ਅੱਜ ਸ਼ਾਮ ਦੇ ਗੈਸਟ। ਪਲੀਜ਼ ਜੁਆਇਨ ਮੀ ਇਨ ਵੈਲਕਮਿੰਗ ਆਵਰ ਗੈਸਟ ਫॉर दिस evening, Jeremy Joseph, running for New York State Senate. Jeremy, good to have you in the studio. Welcome to the program. Sat Sri Akal.
Hey Aashmeeta, thanks for having me. It's great to be here and have the conversation with you.
Yeah. So Jeremy, you're running for New York State Senate in Long Island, and the election date is at the end of August. Now, most folks know the big elections, right? They know that they vote for president every 4 years. This year, we have been putting a lot of focus on the midterms, so they know they're voting, depending on the state they live in, or in New York, for governor, or for, folks running for Congress, or their senators. But it's the local elections that matter most. In fact, local elections and primaries actually determine more of the day-to-day of most people's lives. So I'm really glad you can join us. Even though you're entering politics, your real background is in science. So I'd love to learn a little bit about what you do professionally. Tell us about yourself, Jeremy.
Sure. So my professional background is I'm a scientist. I studied mostly applied physics and mathematics, which led to working in government labs or in tech companies. But no matter where I was working in, it wasn't quite the meaningful work that I wanted to do. I got into the sciences because I wanted to help people. I wanted to study climate change research. And many times we'd find that research that helps people, research that we find might be important, doesn't get funded from the government as often as it should. So for me, this was my sign that if I wanted to make an impact on my community, I would need to do it on my own time through activism.
And what did some of this early activism look like, right? Immigrants and people of color, just living your life sometimes requires a degree of being active, involving yourself in some kind of activism, some kind of cause, because you usually end up with the shorter end of the stick as it is. But for you, this was a little bit more purposeful, right? So tell us about what kind of activism first drew you in, that you eventually turned into a political campaign.
Sure. So I guess I got connected with groups in my area. We were fighting for, a wide variety of things, but the underlying problem was that the working class, and when I say working class, I mean if you go to work every day, you're working class. Yeah. It's not easy to live on Long Island. It's certainly not cheap. Everyone we hear from is struggling to pay their bills, struggling to pay their rent, struggling to pay their property taxes. And it doesn't have to be that way. New York is very rich. We have enough money to cover all the things we need, and it's just a matter of having people in office who are willing to fight for those things. So one main group that I was a part of was called the Invest in Our New York Coalition, and our goal was to address the economic inequity in New York. Because if you're middle class, if you're working class, in New York, you're paying a higher share of your income in taxes than the top 1%. The billionaires, the ultra wealthy, they do not pay their fair share in taxes. And that results in so many problems down the line for the rest of us.
Jeremy, we were talking about this a little bit before we started, right? And I really want to distinguish what this economic inequality really looks like, what you're talking about. So There's a lot of entrepreneurs, business owners, small business owners in the Punjabi, in the South Asian, Indian, and other South Asian communities. But we're not talking about those folks when we talk about people who aren't paying their taxes, right? Someone who's making $400,000 or someone who's making $40,000 a year are actually in the same category when we talk about this tax code. You're talking about people who are way above, millions, tens of millions, maybe hundreds of millions, and those folks aren't contributing. In fact, is it right to say that someone making, $40,000, $50,000 is paying more in taxes than someone making maybe a few million a year?
Absolutely. So for many of us, all of our income comes through wages, what we get from working. For the ultra wealthy, for many of them, their income comes through many different vehicles, whether it be investments or other, sort of inheritances and so on, and those need to be taxed as well.
Absolutely.
Just because you work for money doesn't mean that should be taxed the most.
Yes.
If anything, it should be
taxed the least.
The least.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Like going to work every day isn't hard enough as it is.
Yeah.
Jeremy, I want to talk a little bit more in depth about this, but since you started your campaign, you're officially running for state senate. What kind of support have you been kind of gathering?
So when I started running for this office, I had to think to myself, all right, who is going to come and support a candidate running against our incumbent Democrat state senator? I am a Democrat, but many of us in different activist groups, we're always fighting for what people need in our area. And we found that on Long Island, many of our representatives seemed very far removed from the everyday experience that we were living in Nassau County. And if our representatives weren't going to help work with us and fight for those issues, then one of us had to run. And so I decided to run, and many of these activist groups are backing me because, well, we're all fighting for the same thing.
Absolutely. You have a lot of young supporters. That's always great because, at the end of the day, we need participation from all segments of the population, but folks getting involved early on when they're young is perhaps the most important civic duty that they can kind of get involved in. So it's really good to see that. Yeah. Jeremy Joseph running for New York State Senate. I have a lot of questions for you on your specific policy platforms, where you stand. What are some of the major issues that you are focusing on this campaign? ਇੱਥੇ ਇੱਕ ਛੋਟੀ ਜਿਹੀ ਬ੍ਰੇਕ ਲੈਣ ਦਾ ਸਮਾਂ ਆ ਗਿਆ। ਇਸ਼ੂਜ਼ ਨੂੰ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਾਂਗੇ ਕਿ ਖਾਸ ਕਰਕੇ ਲੌਂਗ ਆਈਲੈਂਡ ਤੇ ਨਾਸਾ ਕਾਉਂਟੀ ਇਸ ਏਰੀਆ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕੀ ਵੱਡੇ ਇਸ਼ੂਜ਼ ਹਨ ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਦੇ ਆਲੇ ਦੁਆਲੇ ਜਰਮੀ ਜੋਸਫ ਆਪਦੀ ਕੈਂਪੇਨ ਰਨ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਹਨ। ਕਨਵਰਸੇਸ਼ਨ ਇਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਜਾਰੀ ਰਹੇਗੀ ਬ੍ਰੇਕ ਤੋਂ ਉਸ ਪਾਰ। ब्रेक तो बाद मुड़ हाजिर है तुसी वेख रहे हो प्रोग्राम अज दा मुद्दा लोकल इलैक्शनस नू लैके खास करके न्यूयॉर्क दे आने वाले जो एक होर असी कह सकते हैं नवा स्पैशल इलैक्शन हो रहा है, प्राइमरी हो रही है न्यूयॉर्क दे विच। दो इहो जे इलैक्शनस इस साल हो रहे, रीडिस्ट्रिक्टिंग नू लैके काफ़ी चीज़ां बदलियां गई हैं, उन्हां दे बारे जानकारी तुहानूं वक्-वक् होर प्रोग्रामां दे विच भी दस्सी गई है। बट अज जदों असी न्यूयॉर्क स्टेट सैनेट दी इस रेस की गल कर रहे हैं, साडे नाल स्टूडियो पहुंचे हुए है कैंडिडेट जर्मी जोसेफ। Once again, Jeremy, you are a scientist by day. You turned your day job into activism, and now you're politically running a campaign. You live in Hicksville, so you really understand especially in the South Asian community, what some of the major needs are of folks that reside in those areas, such as Hicksville. We were talking a little bit about economic inequality and the immigrant's journey, right? At least in New York, generally goes that when you first move here, you end up living somewhere in the city, Queens or one of the boroughs, and then as you kind of get more established, you financially stable, you end up, moving to Long Island. And a lot of these, or New Jersey, but we won't talk about those folks. But when you move to Long Island, a lot of the towns you consider where the gurdwaras and the temples are towns like Hicksville, where our community has each other. They have the grocery stores, they have other folks that look like them, basically, right? But increasingly so, we are disenfranchised even though our numbers are increasing in these communities. And it's not just in any one area, there's multiple areas, right? So I want to talk a little bit about some of the issues that are at the core of your campaign that you feel aren't just important for South Asians that live in these neighborhoods, but for all residents, but especially of people of color, right? So let's start with some of these issues. You mentioned your science background, so I want to start with climate change. This is a very hot topic with the Supreme Court's latest ruling, essentially cutting off the EPA's ability to enforce any regulation on big corporations, etc. Where do you stand on this issue?
Yeah, so climate change is a serious issue, and it's one that, unfortunately, we're not seeing the sense of urgency that is needed, both clearly at the federal level with that EPA ruling, but even at the state and local levels as well. There are so many things that we can be doing, and as the U.S., we should be leading the way in fighting climate change, but so far we've been taking a back seat. For New York, we actually have very strong coalitions and strong Democrat majorities to take significant action on climate change. Things like bills that would punish corporate polluters and tax them for their actions, or another bill called the BPRA, which would help transition our energy grid to more renewable sources of energy, like wind and solar, and move us away from fossil fuels. These are all common sense solutions that we can take right now. We should have taken them a long time ago, but now is the time. And nearly all Democrats statewide are supporting them. Unfortunately, our Democrat state senators on Long Island have been sitting on the fence and not been very supportive of these issues.
I could ask you why, but I think that'll kind of, take this segment beyond the time that we have. So we're going to move right along. Where climate change and the environment are certainly issues that affect all of us, but more so seem to be a concern for younger folks because they see their future as being in jeopardy as a result of inaction. Healthcare is an issue that affects every single American, especially as we go into the older voting bank. These folks are especially hit hard when we don't provide, as a nation or a state or a county, adequate healthcare services. What more do you think needs to be done in your district, in your area, in Nassau County?
Well, we have a lot to do on healthcare. There's one statistic for New York, and I suspect this applies to the whole US, but I believe 50% of all New Yorkers can fall under three categories. They are either uninsured, they are delaying medical care because they cannot afford it, or they have medical debt. Now, these sort of things don't happen in most of the rest of the world. And this is something that's completely preventable here if we were to just have a public healthcare system. So this is something that many advocates are fighting for statewide, and the need for this was completely laid bare during the pandemic. We had a global health crisis, but in the US, for every person that lost their job because of the pandemic, that also meant they lost their insurance, and that meant they lost their health care. At a time when we needed health care the most, we had the least access to it. So you had countries in Europe who were able to fare better because they had a public healthcare system, and this is something that we could have for New York. And that's something that I've been talking about with many voters, and everyone understands we need a public healthcare system. Everyone is tired of dealing with their private insurance company. With this new New York Health Act, we would have no more networks or co-pays or deductibles. You would pay directly for, or rather, all medical service would be free at the point of service.
Once again, we're talking about taxes and inequality, but this is one of those issues where the other side always says, well, who's going to pay for that, right? Oh, it sounds great, everyone, free healthcare, but who's footing the bill? There's no such thing as free lunches. Someone's paying. So how does the financial back end of this look?
Sure. So that's always everyone's first response is, it sounds too good to be true. But the alternative is that everyone else who has a public healthcare system, they see that we pay essentially a payroll tax to a private insurance company who only provides us healthcare if they can make profit off of it. And they look at our system and think, your system is too crazy to be true. So when we take out this private insurance middleman, every businessman knows you take out the middleman, the costs go down. And that's what this would do.
Okay.
Because we would have our taxes directly fund our healthcare, there would be no profit-driven middleman, and costs would naturally go down.
Interesting. I recently came across something on social media, just, randomly in regards to this, talking about the United States system, it is kind of bizarre when you think about it, where this might be the only country, modern, developed country in the world, where a patient and his care provider, the doctor, can agree that the patient needs a surgery or a treatment plan. They both are in agreement, but they still need to get essentially permission from a third-party insurer on whether that necessary healthcare treatment will be covered, will be paid for, will be even given to the patient. So it is kind of a weird system to think about. Definitely one that needs improving. One area of policy that is especially close to the hearts of all South Asians, I'm sure you had some level of this considering your professional background. Our parents generally tend to push us to focus on education and higher education. So education is an area that matters especially to folks, especially when they move from places like New York City to Long Island, where notably the schools are better. I mean, certainly the taxes would indicate that to some extent, right? These high school taxes that you pay to live in certain towns. What is your stance in education? How does that tie back into the economic inequality and the taxes portion of your platform?
Yeah, so for education, and I believe in the 90s, could be wrong, but there was a lawsuit filed against the state from concerned parents and advocates, and they were saying that many school districts, especially in underserved areas, were not getting the funding they deserved. And so there was a state decision that said, okay, for every kid, there should be this amount of money going to this school district. And that's been a standard that New York has not met, even though they set this decision. And the reason why is because, as we talked earlier, our unfair tax code. We keep putting the burden of funding our schools on working people via property taxes. And on Long Island, the property taxes are way too high. Even you're essentially buying a small car every year in property taxes. And people are faced with these two choices. They don't want to lower funding for their schools because our education is important. But property taxes are becoming so prohibitively expensive, it's hard to live on Long Island. So there is a clear solution for this, and it's one that unfortunately many politicians, both Democrat and Republican, have been afraid to commit to. And it is what I was talking about earlier. It is addressing our tax code in New York and raising the necessary amount of revenue by asking the ultra wealthy to pay their fair share in taxes. That's all we're asking. Just pay their fair share just like the rest of us do. And as a result, our schools will be more fully funded, healthcare, transit, all of our public services will receive the monies they need.
Right.
And our property taxes would go down substantially.
So when we think about budgets, right? Because budget is a big topic in New York, especially this year, with Governor Kathy Hochul's budget being, in the news, being swarmed with such controversy. You're saying that instead of saying we need budget cuts in some of these essential services that serve the majority of the communities and residents of New York, you're saying don't cut the budget, don't cut the services, but bring in more money, not from the pockets of average New Yorkers or working, families or even, business owners, entrepreneurs, but from these ultra wealthy that are, not even working and getting their revenue tax-free in the tens of millions, perhaps. So there's money there. There's no reason to, underfund our schools. We just have to be a little bit stern about where we get it from.
Absolutely.
I think, most folks would certainly get behind that. You mentioned your competition, the incumbent Democrat in this area, Anna Kaplan. I want to talk a little bit about what sets you apart and what folks need to know about getting the vote out. The election takes place at the end of August. ਉਹਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਸਾਰੀ ਜਾਣਕਾਰੀ ਤੇ ਹੋਰ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਜਾਣਕਾਰੀ ਇਸ ਕੈਂਡੀਡੇਟ ਨੂੰ ਲੈ ਕੇ, ਇਸ ਰੇਸ ਨੂੰ ਲੈ ਕੇ, ਇਸ ਏਰੀਆ ਦੇ ਵੋਟਿੰਗ ਨੰਬਰਸ ਨੂੰ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਸ਼ੇਅਰ ਕਰਾਂਗੇ ਬ੍ਰੇਕ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ। ਬ੍ਰੇਕ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਇੱਕ ਵਾਰੀ ਫਿਰ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਸਵਾਗਤ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ। ਤੁਸੀਂ ਵੇਖ ਰਹੇ ਹੋ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਅੱਜ ਦਾ ਮੁੱਦਾ। ਲੋਕਲ ਇਲੈਕਸ਼ਨਸ ਨੂੰ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਖਾਸ ਕਰਕੇ ਨਿਊਯਾਰਕ ਦੇ ਨਾਸਾ ਕਾਉਂਟੀ ਜੋ ਕਿ ਲੌਂਗ ਆਈਲੈਂਡ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਪਾਈ ਜਾਂਦੀ ਹੈ, ਉਹਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਗੱਲ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ। ਜਿਨ ਇਸ਼ੂਜ਼ ਨੂੰ ਅਸੀਂ ਅੱਜ ਟੱਚ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ, ਭਾਵੇਂ ਇਸ ਇਲੈਕਸ਼ਨ ਸਪੈਸੀਫਿਕਲੀ ਨੂੰ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਨਾਸਾ ਕਾਉਂਟੀ ਦੇ ਰੈਜ਼ੀਡੈਂਟਸ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਗੱਲ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ, ਬਟ ਇਹ ਇਸ਼ੂਜ਼, ਇਹ ਮਸਲੇ, ਇਹ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਜਾਣਕਾਰੀ ਰੱਖਣੀ ਚਾਹੀਦੀ ਹੈ। ਬਿਕੋਜ਼ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਵੀ ਸ਼ਹਿਰ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ, ਸਟੇਟ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇਹੋ ਜਿਹੇ ਲੋਕਲ ਇਲੈਕਸ਼ਨਸ ਹੋ ਰਹੇ ਆ ਇਸ ਸਾਲ, ਐਂਡ ਮੁੱਦੇ ਤਾਂ ਸਾਡੇ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਦੇ ਸਾਂਝੇ ਹੀ ਹੈਗੇ, ਭਾਵੇਂ ਉਹ ਐਜੂਕੇਸ਼ਨ ਨੂੰ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਜਾਂ ਪ੍ਰੋਪਰਟੀ ਟੈਕਸਿਸ ਨੂੰ ਲੈ ਕੇ, ਇਨਕਮ ਇਨਇਕੁਆਲਿਟੀ ਨੂੰ ਲੈ ਕੇ, এনवायरमेंट ਨੂੰ ਲੈ ਕੇ, ਹੈਲਥ ਕੇਅਰ ਨੂੰ ਲੈ ਕੇ। ਸੋ ਇਨ ਚੀਜ਼ਾਂ ਬਾਰੇ once again ਇਨਫੋਰਮੇਸ਼ਨ ਸ਼ੇਅਰ ਕਰਨ ਲਈ ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਜੁੜੇ ਹਨ ਸਟੂਡੀਓ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ Jeremy Joseph, candidate for state senate in New York. You are a Democrat that's running against the current Democrat Anna Kaplan, who is the state senator in this area. Anna Kaplan is someone who the community is very familiar with. Jeremy, how do you compare against Senator Anna Kaplan?
Yeah, so I was hopeful when Senator Kaplan got into office in 2018. I've been voting for her each election. But unfortunately, we hoped we would have an ally in office to support a lot of these policies that would help us. And we haven't quite had that. We saw it with the Green Light Bill, when during a time when there was strong anti-immigrant sentiment during the Trump years, Long Island senators had a chance to stand with pro-immigrant bill like Green Light Bill, and instead Senator Kaplan voted against this bill that would have allowed undocumented people to have driver's license. This would have also made our roads safer as well. And since then, she has consistently not voted for these immigrants' rights bills. We've had many bills regarding climate change that she has not been an advocate for. At one point, we had to protest outside her office because she was supporting the construction of a new oil pipeline, the Williams pipeline. And this is not something we should be dealing with for someone in our own party. We hope to have someone who would be championing solutions for climate change, not being part of the problem. And also the New York Health Act. Healthcare is very important for all of us, and she is not supporting that bill as well.
Jeremy, once again, this is a very niche race in the grand scheme of things, but that doesn't mean it doesn't have an outsized impact on the everyday lives of folks that live in this area. So when we talk about people actually understanding the gravity of this upcoming election, of off-year elections, midterms and generals and primaries within a party, the numbers unfortunately paint a very sad picture that we may have the numbers by population, ਸਾਡੀ ਆਬਾਦੀ ਬਹੁਤ ਵਧੀਆ ਹੈ ਤੇ ਵੱਧ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ in areas ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ, but that doesn't mean that we vote in those numbers, right? Being a scientist, right, you have some data that you've put together, and I want to start sharing this data. We'll start with the general. So tell us about what we're seeing on screen here and what this represents in terms of how people turn out to vote.
So on the screen, you'll see, so backing up, with redistricting this year, we have new state senate districts and new congressional districts. So for some of us, we have the same representatives. For others, we're in totally new districts. For this race, state senate district 7, the district has grown, and you'll see that drawn in the purple line on the map. So what I have here is, this shows voter turnout for the 2020 presidential election, the general election. And you can see this is pretty good. This is only Democrats actually. So this covers about 90,000 Democrats in the district. But once you go to the 2020 primary, the presidential primary election.
So the next slide will show that.
So if you look in the bottom left corner, let's say New Hyde Park, Herricks, that area where we know there are large South Asian communities. In the general election, they all came out to vote. But if you look at the map now for the primary, there's a big empty spot.
There's no dots. Can we just go back to the general for a second? Look at the agar tusi bottom left corner de vich vekhoge, you'll see it. It's very packed. Now, in the primary election, jo parties de vich elections hunde, it's practically empty. This is unacceptable.
It's concerning. And then let's go one more step more. So these are presidential years. This is when everyone comes out to vote. But what about in an odd year?
So this is 2021, the county election, same thing. There's no activity. I mean, there was a couple of dots in the last one. This one has nothing.
Yeah, so there are a few small dots there, but this is a representational graph.
Right.
But yeah, we're not seeing that sort of participation from our community in these elections. When I'm talking door to door, people will say, oh, what about the potholes in the street? I say, well, that is your county and your city, your town elections. You need to pay attention to those.
Yeah.
And some will say, oh, what about in our schools, our school boards, they're teaching different history and things.
Yeah.
Oh, that's your school board election. Every election matters. This district is almost 25% Asian.
Wow.
And much of that is South Asian population.
Absolutely.
And that diversity is our strength by far. But if we don't come out to vote, then our representation won't reflect that diversity. So every single year, not just presidential years, but these odd years are for county and local elections. Every 2 years, so like this year, this 2022 election, this is state senate, Congress. These are very important elections. Everything in our society is controlled by some level of government.
Absolutely.
And it's important that you vote at every possible opportunity.
I want to reiterate, District 7 in Long Island, Jay Suresh Jeremy Joseph run kar rahe for state senate to represent District 7 at the state level in Albany. ਉਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ 25% South Asians ਗਿਣੇ ਜਾਂਦੇ voters, registered voters.
Democratic. That is for everyone.
Registered voters.
Registered voters.
25% are South Asians. But are we voting in those numbers? Not nearly enough, especially when it comes to local races, which once again are so important. Jeremy, you put this data together, and the reason I really wanted to share that with viewers is to hopefully motivate them to see how much work we need to do, how far behind we are. Because guess what? Other voting groups don't have this kind of a disparity. They don't have the problem that our South Asian community specifically is facing, where they have high population numbers, high disposable income, high contributions to their communities.
Absolutely.
But very low impact in local government. So I'd love for you to kind of, share the necessary information with our voters about the voting date, about what they need to do if they want to participate, if they live in District 7 on Long Island and they want to make sure that they're voting for their state senator of choice come August 23rd.
Yeah. So you may remember we just had a primary election this past month. That was for governor. This year, because of redistricting, we have an extra primary election. And in Nassau County especially, we have many choices in this primary, which is an unusual thing for us. So this is a great time to read up on the candidates, including myself, and find out who is a best fit for you. So that the primary date for that election is August 23rd. Early voting will be August 13th through the 21st. So about a week of early voting. You can go anytime. Now, before that, if you aren't registered to vote or you've just moved, you have until July 29th to reach the Board of Elections via in-person or online to register to vote, or you can register for an absentee ballot if you know you'll be out of town or unable to vote in person in August. You have until July 29th to file for an absentee ballot. Our campaign is making sure to all the people we've been reaching out to make these options available to them. But please, make sure to make a plan to vote this year. These are very important elections. Every election is important, but yeah.
Absolutely, no, but this is, I'm really glad, you stressed that point again. It's the local elections, right? You're going door to door, you're talking to these people, and they're complaining about the things that they want improved in their lives, whether it's the condition of their roads or the curriculum at their kids' school or how much money is spent on their community. And all of these things are determined by folks that represented us at these levels of government, like you might in Albany, right? So once again, thank you for sharing that information. Jeremy Joseph running for State Senate District 7 in New York. The election date is August 23rd. Early voting starts August 13th. आप the voting place ਦੀ ਜਾਣਕਾਰੀ ਲੈਣ ਲਈ you can check online address ਤੁਸੀਂ insert ਕਰਕੇ ਵੇਖ ਸਕਦੇ ਹੋ ਕਿ ਤੁਹਾਡੀ voting ਕਿੱਥੇ ਹੋਏਗੀ and ਅਗਰ ਤੁਸੀਂ registered ਨਹੀਂ ਹੋ ਹਲੇ there is still time ਮਹੀਨੇ ਦੇ end ਤੱਕ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਆਪ ਦੀ registration ਜਾਂ ਲੈ ਸਕਦੇ ਹੋ ਜਾਂ confirm ਕਰ ਸਕਦੇ ਹੋ ਕਿ ਸਹੀ address ਸਹੀ ਨਾਂ ਸਹੀ information ਰਾਹੀਂ ਤੁਸੀਂ registered ਹੋ ਪਾਰਟੀ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਜੁੜੇ ਹੋਏ ਹੋ Jeremy, once again, great to have you. We wish you the best of luck with this campaign. And, some of these issues, we really hope that our voters understand where it is that we should be taking a stand in regards to some of these big issues. So thank you for joining us tonight. And have a good rest of your campaign.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to be here. A big exciting part of this campaign has been getting to talk to our community at large about these issues and educating everyone on the ways that we can increase our representation at all levels of government.
Wonderful. ਇੱਥੇ ਹੀ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਦੀ ਸਮਾਪਤੀ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਇਸ ਇਲੈਕਸ਼ਨ ਨੂੰ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਸਾਡੇ ਲਈ ਸਾਡੇ ਗੈਸਟ ਲਈ ਕੋਈ ਕੁਐਸਚਨਸ ਕਮੈਂਟਸ ਕੰਸਰਨਸ ਜਾਂ ਅਗਰ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਇਨ ਜਨਰਲ ਆਪ ਦੀ VOTING ਨੂੰ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਕੋਈ ਜਾਣਕਾਰੀ ਲੈਣਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ ਹੋ ਸਾਡੀ ਹੈਲਪ ਲੈਣਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ ਹੋ more than happy to help ਤੁਸੀਂ ਹਮੇਸ਼ਾ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਕੰਟੈਕਟ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੇ ਹੋ info@justbroadcasting.com aashmeeta@justbroadcasting.com ਹੁਣ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਦਿਓ ਇਜਾਜ਼ਤ ਸਤਿ ਸ੍ਰੀ ਅਕਾਲ